The glitch I never knew was coming. We were the perfect couple, or so I thought. 15 years ago, when I met Wyatt, the man I believed would be my forever. Now, sitting amidst the boxes of a life I'm packing away, I realized how profoundly wrong I was. And this is the story of how my perfect marriage crumbled, all because of a short-form video app. I knew from the moment I met Wyatt 15 years ago that we were perfect together. We were both 21, fresh out of college, and I could tell he was completely smitten with me. Who wouldn't be? I had this effortless confidence back then, the kind that made guys like him feel lucky just to be in the same room as me. While other girls were desperately chasing after guys who treated them like garbage, I had found someone who actually appreciated what he had. Wyatt was different from the other guys I dated. He wasn't glued to his phone, he actually listened when I talked, and he seemed genuinely interested in building something real with me. I remember thinking how refreshing it was to be with someone who could go an entire day without checking his phone. Even back then, I was already pretty active on social media. Facebook was huge, Instagram was just getting started. But Wyatt never made me feel bad about it. He understood that staying connected was just part of who I was. Those early years flew by in a blur of perfect moments. We moved in together after 2 years, and everything just clicked. I loved how he'd surprise me with little thoughtful gestures, and he seemed to genuinely enjoy hearing about my day, my friends, my thoughts on everything. When he proposed after 5 years together, I wasn't even surprised. Of course he wanted to marry me. The wedding was exactly what I'd always dreamed of, and I could see in his eyes that he felt like the luckiest guy in the world, which honestly, he was. The first few years of marriage were blissful. We settled into this comfortable routine where I could be myself completely, and Wyatt just accepted all of it. We had our weekly date nights, weekend adventures, and lazy Sunday mornings that stretched into the afternoon. I started getting more into social media as new platforms emerged, but it never seemed to bother him. He'd do his thing, reading, working on his little projects, while I caught up with friends online or discovered new accounts to follow. It felt like the perfect balance. When TikTok started getting really popular a few years ago, I was immediately hooked. The content was so much more entertaining than anything else out there. Funny, creative, and let's be honest, some of these guys were absolutely gorgeous. I found myself spending more and more time scrolling through videos, especially at night when Wyatt was winding down with a book or whatever. It became my way to decompress after long days at work. Hours would pass without me even realizing it, and I'd find myself watching hundreds of videos in a single session. The algorithm was incredible at showing me exactly what I wanted to see. Wyatt started making little comments about my phone usage, especially during our date nights. He'd give me these pathetic puppy dog looks from across the restaurant table when I'd check TikTok between courses, or make passive-aggressive remarks about how I seemed more interested in my screen than in him. It was so annoying. Like, sorry babe, but I'm allowed to relax and enjoy myself. These TikTok creators were actually entertaining, unlike his boring stories about work drama that I'd heard a million times. I tried to explain that it wasn't personal, it was just mindless entertainment. But he kept acting like I was choosing strangers over him. So dramatic. The content I was watching started shifting toward more attractive male creators. Fitness guys, comedians, musicians, men who clearly took care of themselves and had interesting things to say. I started noticing how different they were from Wyatt, who had gotten comfortable in our marriage and stopped putting in much effort. These guys were motivated, charismatic, confident. They made me laugh in ways Wyatt hadn't in years. I began following more and more of them, learning their posting schedules, watching their stories religiously. It felt harmless, just a little fantasy to brighten my day. One evening, I was watching this incredibly attractive actor's TikTok where he was talking about his workout routine. He was shirtless, obviously, and just radiating this confidence and sex appeal that was impossible to ignore. Before I really thought about it, I found myself typing a comment. I'm married, but I just need one chance.
It felt thrilling to put that out there, even though obviously nothing would come of it. I mean, this guy had millions of followers. He wasn't going to notice one random comment from me. But there was something exciting about publicly acknowledging my attraction, even in such a harmless way.
I completely forgot about the comment until a few days later when Wyatt confronted me about it. He was holding his phone with this serious expression like he discovered some terrible secret. "Are you joking right now?" I asked him, genuinely confused about why he seemed so upset. Why is this such a big deal? It was obviously a joke comment, and it wasn't like I'd ever actually get the guy anyway. The whole thing was so clearly fantasy that I couldn't understand why Wyatt was taking it seriously. Then he said something that really pissed me off. He asked how I'd feel if he commented on Elizabeth Dickie's posts about wanting to sleep with her. First of all, that was completely different because Elizabeth Dickie is a legitimate A-list movie star, not some random TikTok fitness guy. Second, if Wyatt commented something like that, he'd probably actually mean it, whereas my comment was obviously playful and harmless. The fact that he couldn't see the difference just showed how dramatic he was being about the whole situation. I gave him what I thought was a reasonable apology, though honestly it felt pretty forced since I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. He made this big speech about how there was no point in making those kinds of comments going forward, and I agreed, just to end the argument. I hated when we fought. It was so much easier to just tell him what he wanted to hear and move on. We made up the next day, and I figured that was the end of it. But I couldn't stop thinking about how controlling he'd been. Who is he to police my social media activity? I was a grown woman, and if I wanted to leave a flirty comment on some guy's video, that was my business. The more I thought about it, the more resentful I became. Wyatt was treating me like a child, and frankly, it made me want to push back even harder. So I kept commenting, but I got smarter about it. I'd delete comments after a while, or I'd be more subtle with my language. But the thrill was still there, that little rush of putting myself out there and imagining what might happen if one of these gorgeous men actually noticed me. And gradually, I started getting bolder. Instead of just commenting, I began sliding into DMs. Most of the big celebrities never responded, which was expected, but a few would send back polite thank you messages that made my heart race. That's when I discovered Riley. He wasn't a massive celebrity, just a regular guy who'd built up a decent following of around 4,000 people by posting cooking videos. But he was incredibly attractive, and more importantly, he actually responded to my messages. We started having real conversations about food, travel, life in general. He was funny and sweet and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and appreciated by a man. Riley made me realize how much I'd been settling for with Wyatt. When was the last time my husband had complimented me or made me feel special? When had he last looked at me the way he used to when we were dating? Riley, on the other hand, told me I was beautiful, asked about my day, remembered details from our previous conversations. He made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. My friend Grace started noticing changes in my behavior around this time. She'd catch me smiling at my phone during lunch breaks, or see me commenting on attractive men's posts. Grace had been divorced twice, so she had experience with relationship drama, but she seemed worried about the path I was heading down. I brushed off her concerns. She was just projecting her own failed marriages onto my situation. The messaging with Riley evolved naturally into something more intimate. We'd text throughout the day, sharing details about our lives, our frustrations, our dreams. He understood me in ways Wyatt never had. When Riley suggested we meet for coffee, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We were friends after all, and I was allowed to have male friends. The fact that Wyatt would probably disapprove just proved how possessive and unreasonable he'd become. The physical relationship with Riley developed quickly after that. We'd meet whenever we could, and every encounter was passionate and intense in a way my marriage hadn't been in years. Riley made me feel desired and beautiful and interesting.
With him, I wasn't just Wyatt's wife going through the motions of a stale marriage. I was Lainey, a woman worth pursuing and cherishing. I told myself I was just taking what I needed to be happy, and what Wyatt didn't know couldn't hurt him. Meanwhile, I was also sending increasingly bold messages to other male influencers and celebrities. Most ignored me, but occasionally I'd get responses that fueled my fantasies. I felt I was living this secret, exciting double life where I could be the confident, desirable woman I'd always been underneath the boring, married exterior. The messages became more explicitly sexual over time, and I started sending photos that definitely crossed lines I never thought I'd cross. But it felt so good to be wanted and appreciated by attractive, successful men. This went on for months. I was managing multiple online flirtations, meeting up with Riley regularly, and somehow keeping it all hidden from Wyatt. I felt incredibly clever and sophisticated, like I was finally taking control of my own happiness instead of just accepting whatever scraps of attention my husband threw my way. The thrill of the secret made everything more intense and exciting. Then, Grace sent me a screenshot that made my blood run cold. It was a comment I'd left on some shirtless cooking influencer's video, something flirty and obvious that I'd completely forgotten about. She texted me asking if everything was okay at home and mentioned that based on her experience with 2 divorces, I should be careful about leaving evidence of cheating around. The word cheating hit me like a slap. That's not what this was. This was just me finally getting the attention and appreciation I deserved. But Grace's warning made me paranoid. I started being more careful about covering my tracks, deleting message threads, and clearing my browser history. The last thing I needed was Wyatt snooping around and finding something to get dramatic about. I was finally happy for the first time in years, and I wasn't about to let his insecurities ruin that. I should have been more careful. One night, after a particularly intense evening with Riley, I came home exhausted and fell asleep almost immediately. I must have left my phone unlocked on the nightstand because the next morning, Wyatt was acting strange. He was quiet and distant, but not in his usual moody way. This felt different, more focused and determined. I figured he was just having a bad day at work and didn't think much of it. The next evening, Wyatt came home from work with an envelope in his hand and the most serious expression I'd ever seen on his face. Before I could even ask what was wrong, he was handing me divorce papers. Divorce papers? I stared at them in complete shock, unable to process what was happening. What? Cheating? I heard myself say, though the words felt foreign coming out of my mouth. He'd found everything. 6 months of messages to 15 different male celebrities and influencers, screenshots of my conversations with Riley, evidence of our physical meetings. Everything I thought I'd hidden so carefully was laid out like some kind of criminal case file. I tried to explain that it wasn't as serious as it looked, that most of it was just harmless fantasy, but Wyatt wasn't having it. When I asked whether there wasn't any room for discussion, he said cheating wasn't the kind of marital issue that you could talk over. I couldn't believe this was happening. 15 years together, and he was ready to throw it all away over some messages and a few meetings with Riley. I tried to negotiate, suggesting I could stay in the guest room while we worked things out, but he was completely cold and unmovable. This wasn't the Wyatt I'd married. This was some stranger who'd already made up his mind to destroy our life together. The next day, he told me I had to leave. Just like that, I was supposed to pack up my things and find somewhere else to live because he'd decided our marriage was over. I tried reasoning with him, reminding him of all the good years we'd had together, but it was like talking to a wall. He had already checked out emotionally, and nothing I said was going to change his mind. I started couch surfing between friends, which was humiliating but temporary. I figured once Wyatt had time to cool down and think rationally, he'd realize how extreme he was being. But weeks passed, and he remained completely unreachable. Every text went unanswered, every call went straight to voicemail. It was like I'd ceased to exist for him. The divorce proceedings were a nightmare because he had evidence of the adultery. I basically got nothing. No alimony, no claim to the apartment, nothing. The judge seemed to view me as some kind of villain, and Wyatt's lawyer painted me as this manipulative cheater who'd betrayed her loving husband. They made it sound so much worse than it actually was. I tried to explain that I'd just been seeking connection and appreciation that was missing from my marriage, but nobody wanted to hear my side of the story. When I exhausted my friend's patience and generosity, I had no choice but to move in with my sister, 2 hours away. The daily commute to keep my job was brutal. 4 hours round trip on the train, plus a full workday. I was exhausted constantly, and the stress was making me sick. I kept thinking about how comfortable Wyatt was in our apartment, living his unchanged life while I suffered the consequences of his vindictive decision to blow up our marriage.
After a few weeks of the hellish commute, I swallowed my pride and called him. I was crying and exhausted, and I begged him to let me move back in. I offered to pay rent, to sleep in the guest room, anything just to avoid the daily torture of that train ride. I told him that the love he'd had for me wasn't supposed to have just disappeared overnight, that we could find a way to work through this if he'd just give us a chance. But he threatened to get a restraining order if I didn't stop contacting him. A restraining order like I was some kind of dangerous criminal instead of his wife of 10 years who'd made some mistakes. I lost it and called him every name I could think of, telling him he was being petty and cruel. He actually admitted he was being petty and said he didn't mind it. That's when I knew the man I'd married was gone, replaced by this cold stranger who seemed to enjoy watching me suffer. Eventually, I had to quit my job and find something closer to my sister's place. The new job pays less and is nowhere near as good as what I had before. But I couldn't keep up that commute. My entire life had been turned upside down. New city, new job, new living situation. While Wyatt got to keep everything exactly the same. The apartment, his job, his routine, his friends. He lost nothing, while I lost everything. Sometimes I lay awake at night, thinking about how different things could have been if he'd just been willing to work with me instead of immediately jumping to the nuclear option. Yes, I made mistakes, but marriages are supposed to survive challenges. Other couples work through infidelity all the time. But Wyatt was too proud and stubborn to even try. He'd rather destroy 15 years of history than admit that maybe he bore some responsibility for why I'd felt the need to look elsewhere for connection and appreciation. The worst part is how he's managed to make me look like the villain in all of this. His friends probably think I'm some terrible person who betrayed this perfect husband, when the reality is so much more complicated. I was lonely and unappreciated in my marriage, and I found people who made me feel valued and desired. Maybe I went about it the wrong way, but my needs were real and valid. Wyatt's refusal to acknowledge his own role in what happened just proves how selfish and self-righteous he's always been underneath that nice guy exterior. I know I'm better off without someone so unforgiving and petty, but that doesn't make the practical consequences any easier to deal with. Starting over at 36 is terrifying, especially when you've lost everything you'd built over 15 years. Some days I can barely get out of bed thinking about how one person's vindictive decision completely destroyed the life I'd worked so hard to create. But I'm trying to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on Wyatt's cruelty. Maybe this is the universe's way of telling me I deserve better than someone who'd throw away our entire relationship over some messages and a brief connection with someone who actually appreciated me. I'm still young enough to find real love with someone who won't try to control and punish me for being human and having needs. Someone who understands that marriage is about forgiveness and growth, not rigid rules and harsh consequences. The hardest part is accepting that the Wyatt I fell in love with 15 years ago, the kind, understanding man who seemed to cherish me, was apparently just an act he could drop the moment things got complicated.
The real Wyatt turned out to be someone who could methodically gather evidence against his own wife, visit divorce lawyers in secret, and then destroy her life without a moment's hesitation or regret. That's not the behavior of someone who ever truly loved me. That's the behavior of someone who was just waiting for an excuse to prove his moral superiority. I may have made some questionable choices, but at least I was honest about my feelings and needs. At least I was trying to find happiness and connection, even if I went about it imperfectly. Wyatt's response revealed him to be vindictive, controlling, and fundamentally incapable of the kind of forgiveness that real love requires. In the end, maybe I'm the one who dodged a bullet.